The following is a presentation of New Worker Radio. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily represent those of WZML, its staff, or management.
Hello, and welcome to New Worker News on WZML 92.9. My name is Manolis, bringing you national and international updates from a worker's perspective.
The impact of the imperialist embargo on the quality of life of the Cuban people has been worsening for years. Now, the United States is further tightening the blockade against Cuba. On June 30th, a memorandum signed by President Trump imposed even stricter travel restrictions and tighter restrictions on remittances. The aim is to cut off the regime's oxygen, according to Republican Representative Carlos Jimenez. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also commented on the order, saying, "There is no doubt that under President Trump's leadership, we will hold the illegitimate Cuban regime accountable." The goals laid out in the memorandum include the continuation and strengthening of the economic embargo, blocking all economic flows that could benefit the Cuban state, promoting the creation of a private U.S.-oriented market sector on the island, banning U.S. citizens from traveling as tourists to Cuba, and thwarting all international attempts to lift the sanctions. Cuba's foreign ministry strongly condemned the intensification of the blockade, arguing that it represents an escalation of aggression that affects the entire population and represents the main obstacle to the country's development. In recent years, the effects of the U.S. embargo have worsened. For example, there are shortages of medicines and recurring power outages. The regulation continues U.S. policy of deliberately disrupting its key sources of income, including the exports of goods, remittances from Cubans living abroad, and tourism. Many international companies are hesitant to enter into economic relations with Cuba or invest there. This is due to the strict U.S. sanctions and the fear of penalties. Although such transactions are generally legal, many companies fear exclusion from the U.S. financial system. Especially since the introduction of the sanctions in 2017, numerous banks have terminated their cooperation with Cuba, even for legitimate transactions such as the purchase of food, medicine, or other essential goods. UN Special Rapporteur Elena Duhan pointed this out in a press release in July 2024. Furthermore, the stated aim of the U.S. blockade is to use the economic blockade to promote the activities of counter-revolutionary groups in order to ultimately overthrow the achievements of the Cuban people and socialism. It was also announced that the USA would deny the Cuban women's national volleyball team participation in an international tournament in Puerto Rico. According to their coach, the visa denial's failure to participate in the tournament in Puerto Rico will prevent the Cuban team from qualifying for the Nations League, which features the world's 18 best national teams. In sum, these measures are an act of aggression that reinforces the blockade and punishes the entire Cuban people, while hindering the island's development. The Communist Workers' Platform stands in solidarity with Cuba and its people. The survival of the Cuban Revolution is a constant reminder to imperialism that another world is possible. A world where the people control their resources, where education and health are rights and not commodities. That is why the bourgeoisie of the United States, regardless of whether it is Democrat or Republican, never stops trying to crush Cuba. The renewed blockade is not a response to a lack of democracy, but to a lack of capitalist control. We, in the working class, must see through these lies. The attack on Cuba is an attack on the right of every people to build socialism. The United States Agency for International Development was dissolved on July 1st, 2025. The problem is clear. Despite USAID payments, anti-American sentiment is growing in the countries receiving aid. Under the Trump administration, it has been made clear that aid will only be paid to regimes that submit to U.S. interests. The State Department will assume responsibility for this. Former U.S. Presidents Bush and Obama have expressed their disappointment at the closure of USAID, but their language is also clear. USAID not only saved lives, but also created U.S. markets and trading partners. The various presidents may not agree on their tactics, but they share the common goal of safeguarding the profits of capital. Under President Biden, the U.S. delivered over $60 billion in military aid to Ukraine. Since January, however, no new arms deliveries have been approved, and some pending shipments have even been canceled, until July 8th, when Trump decided to pledge defensive weapons to strengthen Ukrainian air defenses. While Zelensky still dreams of total victory, the heads of the states of countries like the United States and France are already negotiating with Putin to discuss a ceasefire and the subsequent division of the spoils. The only thing that is clear is that the working class of Ukraine, Russia, and the arms-supplying countries will have to pay for the war. Trump, through the Big Beautiful Bill Act, is also making vast cuts in the U.S. as a part of his all-out assault on the working class. The U.S. government is justifying all of its cuts, for example, of education, with the so-called anti-Semitic pro-Palestinian protests that happened at the universities. In particular, the U.S. government is demanding stricter guidelines for the admission of international students. These are intended to prevent so-called anti-Semitic or contrary to American values individuals from being allowed to study in the U.S. The question remains as to where the Trump administration intends to direct the freed-up funds. More than the already approved package of billions of dollars for Israel, an escalation of the war in the Middle East, armament against China. The only thing that is certain is that the government of the U.S., like every other capitalist imperialist government, is on the path to war. In more national and international news, a cynical and brutal crackdown on immigrants and asylum seekers is also being promoted in the U.S., with the aim of fully adapting immigration to the needs of the capitalist economy. On June 27th, the Supreme Court limited the use of national injunctions, or the ability of federal judges to issue orders that, in recent years, have hindered the implementation of policies by both Republican and Democratic governments. The decision was long awaited, given the backdrop of Republican President Donald Trump's executive order that eliminates so-called birthright citizenship. The Supreme Court said the blanket orders likely exceed the authority Congress has granted to federal courts. The decision passed by a majority of 6-3. The court granted the Trump administration's request to limit the scope of national orders that block the president's executive orders. The Supreme Court's decision paves the way for the early implementation in some states of Trump's executive order, which abolishes the historic practice that automatically grants citizenship to anyone born in the United States, regardless of the immigration status of their parents. The decision has caused confusion, as it is not entirely clear what the practical consequences will be if citizenship at birth applies to newborns in some states but not in others. Republican Senator Mark Wayne Mullen stated that children born in the U.S. to so-called illegal immigrants should be deported along with their families if the adults are deported, even though these children, based on the legislation in force so far, are U.S. citizens. We communists know very well that the bourgeoisie, even in its internal struggles, uses the judiciary, which also has the interest of the capitalist class, to act according to its convenience, its interests, and its plan at any given time. The judiciary is the legal branch of the bourgeoisie, and depending on the inter-bourgeois struggle between its various factions, it fights for one side or the other, but always to the benefit of the capitalists and their representatives. The conflict at stake is a class conflict between capitalists, so the working class has no stake in this scenario. The side we choose is that next to our class brothers and sisters of all countries, alongside all migrant workers. The decision of the Supreme Court takes place in context of Trump's plans for mass deportation, which is bolstered with the Big Beautiful Bill Act that will provide states massive subsidies for companies who will reap large profits in the business of deportations. One of the detention centers has already been completed in southern Florida and dubbed Alligator Alcatraz. It was inaugurated with the attendance of President Trump, indicative of the savagery of the anti-immigration policy. Alligator Alcatraz is located in the remote Everglades, a vast area of tropical wetlands that occupies the southern part of the state of Florida and is home to alligators, crocodiles, and pythons. A Florida official has noted that the area provides natural barriers requiring minimal security measures. The number of immigrants detained at the federal level has increased from 39,000 at the beginning of the year to 56,000 as of June 15, and more detention facilities are planned. These detention centers, in addition to denying the most basic rights, are even more profitable than prisons. Detainees are forced to work, and those who refuse are threatened with disciplinary actions such as food deprivation or solitary confinement. This allows the company to maintain minimal expenses while contracts with ICE guarantee a fixed monthly income per inmate. The bourgeoisie implements new methods for the old practice of slavery. ICE's violent arrests and the separation of families are deeply connected to the interests of the bourgeoisie, to the accumulation of capital, and the drive for higher profits through intensified exploitation. 4 senior executives from U.S. technology giants Palantir, Meta, and OpenAI have been officially appointed lieutenant colonels in the U.S. Army following the creation of a special unit for experts from large technology groups whose importance to the U.S. military is being upgraded. On June 13th, the U.S. Army announced the creation of Detachment 201, also known as the Executive Innovation Corps, which it describes as a new initiative aimed at merging cutting-edge technology expertise with military innovation. According to the announcement, Detachment 201 is an initiative to bring senior tech industry executives into the Army Reserve as part-time senior advisors. Their role will focus on targeted, scalable projects that support the development of rapid and effective technology solutions for complex challenges. By integrating private sector expertise, the program strengthens broader efforts like the Army Transformation Initiative, which seeks to make the military more agile, intelligent, and effective. The 4 new officers are the CEOs of the 3 tech giants. According to the Army, their swearing in marks the start of a broader mission to encourage more tech professionals to serve in the military without leaving their civilian careers. The goal is to demonstrate to future generations that they can make a meaningful impact while still maintaining their roles in the private sector. Meta is the owner of Facebook and Instagram, and OpenAI is the owner of ChatGPT, respectively. However, they have developed close cooperation with the U.S. government in order to offer their services for the needs of the U.S. military. The notorious Palantir focuses particularly on customers such as the armed forces, government agencies, and departments and intelligence agencies. Palantir stock is by far the best performer in the S&P 500 this year, thanks in large part to the huge contracts it has signed with the Trump administration. It is a software company that creates platforms for collecting, connecting, and analyzing data. It was funded since its founding in 2003 by the CIA's investment arm, In-Q-Tel, which spent a total of more than $300 million on Palantir and for years remained its sole client. Palantir's product descriptions are a bit vague. According to the company's co-founder, Alex Karp, Palantir, quote, is here to disrupt and, when necessary, to scare enemies and in some cases kill them. In an interview, Karp said, quote, "This is a company built for tough times. Tough times are very good for Palantir because we create products that are built for risk." In recent years, Palantir has emerged as a dominant intelligence gathering and analysis company. It now enjoys unrestricted access to sensitive data on citizens in the US, the UK, and elsewhere. Its clients include the US Department of Defense, the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, ICE, and the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. In several cases, it has taken on projects for the U.S. military that other technology companies have refused after employee protests. Thus, Palantir has developed a reputation as a company that does not face such ethical dilemmas. Moreover, Karp had warned prospective employees of the company, saying, quote, "If you do not feel comfortable supporting the legitimate efforts of America and its allies in the context of war, do not join Palantir." Palantir has partnered with several major tech firms, including a notable collaboration with Microsoft announced last August. The deal aims to deliver advanced analytics and AI capabilities on classified networks to support key U.S. national security operations. Through this partnership, Microsoft's large language models, accessed via the Azure OpenAI service, will be integrated into Palantir's AI platforms within secure government cloud environments. In an article published the same day, the U.S. military announced the creation of Detachment 201. Palantir's Chief Technology Officer, Shyam Sankar, outlined why the government is pushing for greater military use of advanced technologies from the private sector. He pointed to operations like the Mossad drone strike that killed numerous Hezbollah officers and Ukraine's recent drone attacks on Russian air bases using concealed launch platforms as examples of how technology is once again reshaping modern warfare and why the military must adapt accordingly. Sankar noted that just a decade ago, it would have been rare for so many major tech companies to align themselves publicly with the U.S. military, or for the military to seek out active support from the nation's business leaders by creating dedicated units to leverage their technical expertise. But what made all that unthinkable 10 years ago a reality, the creation of the technology group, was, quote, necessary, as Sankar underlined, due to a geopolitical great change in which the, quote, wars in Europe and the Middle East, and above all, the threat of a war in the Pacific, have focused the country's attention and started an effort to mobilize. The development and integration of new technologies in the fields of imperialist warfare and intelligence is an integral part of the battle for primacy in the global imperialist system. In this context, the U.S., like its Euro-Atlantic allies, have accelerated their efforts in various fields spearheaded by the development of artificial intelligence, making new investments for its integration into the development of weapons, war prediction systems, and cybersecurity. New technologies, developed under the control of large business groups, empower the imperialists and their armies at a time when they are intensively preparing for a generalized conflict in the battle for dominance in the imperialist system. The steps towards integrating more and more sectors into the war economy are a warning sign for the peoples of the world. They make even more urgent the need to strengthen the struggle against imperialist war, against the capitalist system in general, which develops research and technology based on profit and the needs of war machines. The Trump administration's Big Beautiful Bill Act, which drastically adjusts government spending to the needs of war preparation, was signed into law on July 4th. The bill provides for a cut to healthcare beneficiaries by at least $7.6 million, cuts to federal pensions, spending cuts to food assistance programs on which more than 42 million poor Americans depend each year, cuts to student loan subsidies, and so much more. Its particular aim is to secure additional funds for the armed forces and so-called border security. The satisfaction of big capital was expressed by the American Bankers Association, ABA, which stated that it strongly supports many of the provisions of the bill for the much-needed tax relief they offer for the development of innovation. Former Trump ally Elon Musk strongly criticized the bill, warning that it would lead to reckless government spending and a massive $5 trillion increase in the debt ceiling. He argued that lawmakers who support the measure should be ashamed and vowed to work against their re-election in the upcoming primaries, even floating the idea of creating a third party, indicating the widening contradictions within bourgeois circles.
We'll be right back with more of New Worker News here on 92.9 FM WZML. But I want to remind you that every day throughout this country, workers are subjected to injustices and humiliation at the hands of the capitalists, from unpaid wages to mass layoffs. So we at New Worker understand the tyranny that the workplace is for workers. This is why we fight to expose these injustices. Only through militant organization of the working class can we stand toe-to-toe against the bosses. So this is why we want to hear from you, the listener. Are you having issues at work? Bosses cutting your hours or wages? Are you or your fellow workers' safety being thrown out of the window in the name of ever-increasing profit? Well, you are not alone. So reach out to us to tell your story. You can anonymously send an email or even a voice memo to cwpusa@protonmail.com. Again, that is cwpusa@protonmail.com. And check us out online at newworker.us. And now back to New Worker Radio, only here on 92.9 FM, WZML.
The Mamdani moment. It is the responsibility of the communists to expose the false hopes and illusions the capitalist system tosses at our class. It is imperative that the working class confront not only its open enemies, but also its fake friends. Today, we are confronted with such a moment, embodied in New York City Democrat Zohran Mamdani. On June 24th, 2025, Mamdani won the Democratic primary for mayor of New York City, defeating former Governor Andrew Cuomo in what has been widely hailed by both sides of the aisle as a political upheaval. Cuomo represented the decaying corpse of the establishment Democratic machine, backed by over $27 million in super PAC money from all sorts of ghoulish real estate developers, hedge fund billionaires, and even former mayors like Michael Bloomberg. Mr. Mamdani, by contrast, ran a slick campaign operating off donations and public matching funds and hundreds of DSA volunteers, if not thousands. His win, many proclaimed, was proof that socialism has gained steam in America. Mamdani's victory has been both demonized by the reactionary Republicans and celebrated by the Lost at Sea socialist movement. But this is not the dawn of a new socialism. Rather, this is a rerun of an old tragedy. Zohran Mamdani and the quote-unquote democratic socialism he advocates for is not a future for the working class. He represents the latest installment of an old strategy. In the face of a developing crisis of capitalism, the ruling class turns to all kinds of solutions. The more narrow-minded and nationalist sections of capital like Elon Musk, the oil companies, and increasingly the tech giants themselves, support the rise of reactionaries, while other sections of the ruling class seek to sanitize capitalism, buy off the workers to shut up their rabble-rousing. This is containment, absorption. Mamdani is charming. His campaign successfully branded him as a man of the people. His proposals played to the popular sentiment on key issues from Palestine to the cost of living. His visuals were slick. But none of that changes the fundamental issues. He is a candidate of the Democratic Party, the party of billionaires, the capitalists, the very party that has aided and abetted the genocide of Palestine. Let us be clear. The Democratic Party is not a battlefield. It is a fortress for the rich capitalists with a graveyard of workers at its entryway. How many different workers and people struggles, from the trade union movement to the civil rights movement, have found their dead ends in the Democratic Party? How many more do we need there be? This is not the Democrats leaving the working class behind. This is the Democrats weaponizing the numerical and organizational power of workers to defeat their rival Republicans, with the objective effect of exhausting popular energy while boosting the position of one group of billionaires over the other. The Mamdani moment is a rerun of an old season. He follows in the footsteps of Bernie Sanders, AOC, and other quote-unquote democratic socialists who have broken strikes, funded arms companies, and dealt a soft hand to genocide. Mr. Mamdani is ready to follow in their footsteps. He will drape his administration in poetic language while ultimately putting lipstick on the pig of capitalism, even if he achieves a $30 minimum wage. Capitalism, a system built around making everything, including our own lives, for sale, would reign untouched. All those gains would be momentary, if that. We must be absolutely clear. No reform, however progressive, can resolve the contradiction at the heart of capitalism and build a better lasting world for workers. Social democracy, Mamdani and DSA's brand of snake oil socialism, can only manage capital, delaying its worst effects for only a split second. The capitalists will hike the prices. The wealthy will eventually demand of us more hours, fewer benefits, and more profits. This is the reality of progressive victory within the capitalist state. Mamdani and the democratic socialism he stands for has been attempted before. The most notable and tragic example is Salvador Allende's presidential victory in Chile in 1970. Allende and his Socialist Party won the presidential election. They initiated the, quote, Chilean path to socialism, unquote, with a number of nationalizations, reforms, wage hikes, and even central economic planning via Operation Cybersyn. However, the wage hikes were eroded by inflation, and infamously, the Chilean capitalist class regrouped and violently seized back power from Allende, leading to his death and the mass torture and execution of thousands of Chilean people under the new dictator Pinochet. The workers paid for the mistakes of democratic socialism with their own lives. This is a tried and truly failed strategy that does not free the working class from capitalism, but delivers us to the reactionaries. What Mamdani offers is not socialism, but a sedative, window dressing for the machinery of our own exploitation. Across the world, the capitalist system is breaking down. In Gaza, genocide is carried out in full view. In Sudan and Congo, proxy conflicts rage. In Ukraine, U.S.-backed escalation continues. With Iran, a near-miss war exposed just how close we are to a global conflagration. And at home, prices rise, wages stagnate, climate catastrophe hits thousands. In the face of all this, we are told to vote, to trust the process, to believe that progressive politicians and self-described socialists will solve the symptoms without addressing the root causes. We must finish with this game. The Communist Workers' Platform of the USA is building the organization our class needs. A communist party structurally rooted in the working class. A party that prepares the working class to take power. While we recognize elections as a field of struggle for the Communist Party, we do not confuse this front as an objective unto itself. And we remain clear that the state, the U.S. Constitution, and all its branches of government are a tool of oppression and exploitation for the capitalists to use against us. There is no saving or reforming the system, this bourgeois state. Ultimately, there can be no sharing power with the capitalists. They won't let us. At the end of the day, either we win or they do. We cannot afford to have the Mamdanis of the world confuse our class in this fight. Regardless of what we choose now, history proves there is no refuge in retreat. We will either meet this crisis on our feet, mounting the offensive, or the crisis will find us on our knees, isolated and weak. The old world is dying. There's only one way forward, the working class revolution, the fight for socialism communism. History is on the side of our class, the working class. The struggle has already begun. There's a world to win. The fight is ours. The decision to join is yours. You may find our interest form on our website, cwp-usa.org, or contact us through newworker.us.
In more national and international news, 1/3 of U.S. households are forced to spend more than 30% of their income on housing and electricity, a level defined by researchers as economically unsustainable. According to a recent analysis by the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, this share will reach 32.7% by 2023, which represents a serious deterioration in the living conditions of the working population in the U.S. The situation is worst in California, followed by Hawaii, Florida, and New York. In less populated states, such as West Virginia and North Dakota, the percentage is lower, but even there, the cost crisis hits the lowest income earners. Since the 2008 financial crisis, rents have risen rapidly, while homeowners have previously been able to benefit from low interest rates. But when interest rates rose in 2022, so did the cost of renting. This was followed by inflation, higher insurance premiums, and rising property taxes, which hit both renters and homeowners. The gap between these groups is narrowing, but both suffer from the same fundamental contradiction. The right to housing has been transformed into a commodity on the market. In the 50 largest cities in the United States, renters are now forced to spend over half of their income on rent, which means that basic needs such as food, healthcare, and education have to take a back seat. Capitalism cannot solve the housing problem. It creates it. Housing is not built for workers and the working people who built it to live in, but for investors to maximize their returns. Under the system, the most basic human needs are transformed into a source of profit, while the working class is forced to choose between a roof over their heads and food on the table. What is needed is not more market solutions or adjusted interest rate weapons. What is needed is socialization of the housing sector and the power of the proletariat over the planning of resources. Housing is a right, not a commodity.
You've been listening to New Worker News on 92.9 FM WZML, your home for local, national, and international news, all from a working class perspective. New Worker News is the official organ of the Communist Workers Platform. If you're a worker, we would like to hear from you. You can reach us at cwpusa@protonmail.com. Again, that's cwpusa@protonmail.com. If you would like more news from a worker's point of view, visit us at newworker.us. You can find weekly articles on events happening all over the country and internationally. If you've enjoyed the program and wish to see more working class reporting, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/New Worker. And thank you for listening to New Worker News on 92.9 FM WZML.